Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham. Has the way that love has arisen in you seemed out of place or even taboo? My mission is to expand the conversation of love in the world. Is it possible to have deep, loving, healthy relationships? Have you ever been curious about having more than one relationship or partner at a time? Get ready to transform in love, be courageous, and set yourself free. In this show, we talk about relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. I shed light on things that are not always talked about with conversations about expanding love. The Elizabeth Cunningham Show starts now. Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cunningham, and we are here to courageously expand love. And today we are talking to an amazing human, and what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to introduce her in just a second here. But what we're talking about today are a little bit heavier topics and really, really, really important topics. So who I have here today is Claire Travers, and Claire is a femme polyamorous queer right after my own heart. And is the director and founder of PolyPages, an academic non-monogamous platform and podcast. PolyPages is running events around critical conversations about polyamory, about a global book club with the support of Thorntree Press and collaborators with UK-based polyamorous communities to produce the Polyamory Day showcase happening on April 2nd. So it's coming up. And Claire is a researcher, writer, and humanitarian aid worker. I'm so excited for you to be here. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on. Long-time listener, first-time caller. That's what they say,
yeah.
Right?
That's what you're supposed to say, right?
That's what you have to say, yeah.
Yeah, we just had Claire call in today. It's no big deal, you know.
Yeah. No, I'm so excited. I know that like we have been talking about this in like our group chat and like the off of this, and I'm really happy to be talking about. I know it sounds very serious, but we can still make it light and approachable, I think, because today we're going to be talking a little bit about when things go wrong in polyamory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as, you know, as most, well, rather, I'm not going to even say most. I think that it's safe to say that in all relationships or in all relationship types, rather, that things can go wrong, you know, whether it be monogamous, polyamorous. We're going to talk a little bit today about relationship anarchy. That regardless of what the relationship style it is that you are in, that, you know, people are people, and sometimes people are, you know, abusive or unhealthy or, you know, do things in relationships that, you know, don't work, right? And so yeah, so I think it's really important to talk about, because then when we experience these things, or when we know people who experience these things, that we can do something about it. You know, we're not just stuck, right? And I think that a lot of the times in abusive relationships specifically, you can feel stuck. You know, it's like, how do I get out of this? How do I handle this? You know, is this okay? Am I okay?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Claire,
in fact, that's one of, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, that's one of the big red flags I hear so often when we talk about this topic. It's like, oh, I just feel like I can't do anything else. And that feeling of stuck, I think like you encapsulated it just so well in the intro just then. Like, that's one of the really big red flags, but we will get on to more of those throughout the session.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I kind of want to start off with just kind of what are some of the ways in which abuse presents itself in polyamory that maybe are more unique to a polyamorous relationship?
So I think it's really helpful to start from a place of like understanding the difference between abuse and like any other type of like bad feeling, right? Because abuse is this really specific thing. It's a pattern of behavior sustained by the perpetrator in order, or with the design, intent, or consequence, to make you unable to leave the situation, whether that's a friendship or a relationship or a primary or a secondary, like whatever it is. The aim of this pattern of abusive behaviors, and there's so many tactics, there's so many different ways of understanding it, but the core of that is to try and disenfranchise you from your power and your control within the relationship. And I think if we start from that place, it kind of helps us to think about the difference between what abuse is and what is harm, what is unhealthy, what is toxic, because something can be harmful but not be abuse. And I think this is a really important distinction that I have to like constantly remake, because it does get lost in the shuffle. And as you've just said, like there's nothing about polyamory that makes us immune to abusive people. In fact, you could even say that there are some parts of our subculture and the way that kind of we structure our subculture that makes abuse like happen. We see it again and again. We see abuse as being platformed and then called out and then being deplatformed. So this definitely happens both in our personal relationships and also on like a community level in ways that I think are really interesting and different from maybe like the mononormative mainstream understandings of what abuse are. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the understandings of abuse in, the general, not just in like the layperson's understanding of abuse, but also in like the understanding that service providers lean on in order to provide services to people that are trying to leave abusive situations. They're so mononormative, they're so normalized for a monogamous relationship that you are more likely to find these people treating the non-monogamy as maybe a tool of the abuser or as a part of the abuse, and that's not obviously always the case. Just like monogamy can be leveraged by an abuser, polyamory can be leveraged as well. So there's nothing special about polyamory that makes it more or less likely to be an abusive dynamic.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of great distinctions that you just shared, and I think the first one is it's abuse is its own thing in and of itself, and doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether you're in a monogamous relationship or a polyamorous relationship. It just might present itself in unique ways, in different ways.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you said was like the difference between abuse and just harm, right? Or abuse and unhealthy behavior. And so how would we know the difference between abuse and unhealthy behavior? I know one of the things that you said was like it's a pattern, like abuse is a pattern.
Yes.
But if you were in an abusive situation, how would that look?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to spot patterns that are shaping your behavior from the inside. And that's why it's so important to have a support network that goes beyond your partners and goes into people that don't know them, have a diverse group of support, because they're the people that are going to be able to help you like check that whether this has been something that seems to be continually happening that you don't like, or whether it's happening with this sort of design, intent, or consequence of making you unable to leave, right? Something done once that hurts. There shouldn't be any reason why you cannot have a conversation with the people that have done that and correct the behavior, or at least have an understanding of why that harm has been felt in the way that it has. Once those communications kind of like begin to disappear, we begin to not be able to call out behaviors. We find ourselves in a pattern of accepting slightly worse treatment until we get to the point where that treatment is so normalized that we don't even realize that it's abuse. Like, this is one of the things that people sometimes don't understand, is that when someone's in an abusive relationship with anyone, with like a parent, a friend, a lover, whatever, chances are they don't actually realize that this is not normal. And if they do, they think it's their fault, because these patterns are patterns. Like, they change the way that we think, they change the way that we absorb and reflect our own like identity. So one of the things to sort of like watch out for is when you cannot have those conversations. And the second thing I would always look out for is whether or not this is a pattern that is like continuing despite having those conversations. There are a lot of different tactics that are used. One of the most common ones, obviously, is gaslighting, which I feel like a lot of people know. But this is when someone is trying to tell you, like, "Oh, well, that didn't happen." And that can really mess with your understanding of reality, and also can kind of undercut your ability to check the patterns, your ability to check the treatment you are providing. Because if you're going to someone being like, "Hey, last night when you yelled at me like that, it made me feel really unsafe," and they go, "I didn't yell at you. What are you talking about?" And you can't prove it. right? So if you're beginning to like not really be completely certain about like what is real in the relationship, this is a big red flag. This is like a really important one. This is something that we see in any type of abusive relationship, I think. The last one that is probably this being stuck feeling that you mentioned earlier, right? When the very idea of leaving or like confronting this person, you don't know how it's going to go. It can be like really difficult to sort of like get back out of that again. So those are kind of like some of the big ones. Obviously, we worked with the Network Red to make a very long list of the red flags, and we can make that available afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I have that I kind of use to differentiate between like starting to recognize the patterns of abuse is pink flags. And that's when I worked with a domestic violence center, we would say pink flags. And so, like, a pink flag is something where it's just like, okay, that could be just an unhealthy, thing that happened, something like that. But then but then it's like, okay, I've had a lot of pink flags, right? So is this starting to turn into a red flag, and red flag meaning that it's going to be abusive? Just as like, I know not everybody does that, but that's been something that's been really helpful for myself and people that I've worked with in the past as well, is to start to like recognize those patterns where it's like, wow, there's a lot of pink flags.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is starting to be a pattern.
Yeah,
right?
I love that. I think that's a great way of approaching it, because some of these things are just harmful and they can be corrected. But a pattern of them happening over and over again, yeah, that's cycling into an abusive place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to take a really quick break here. I think we did a really good job of breaking down like what is abuse, and what that might look like, or how that might feel in a relationship. But when we come back from the break, I want to talk more a little bit about going into polyamory, and like maybe a little bit more about what that would look like inside of polyamory specifically. So we are going to take a short break, and we will be right back with Claire and really dive into this topic a little bit deeper, make it more real. Welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, and we are here with Claire Travers, and we are courageously expanding love inside. And what we're talking about is abuse, and specifically abuse inside of polyamory. So I want to know, what are some of the more specific signs inside of polyamory where there might be indicative of abusive behavior?
Yeah, so the theoretical understandings of abuse, and I think also this bears out when we talk about this anecdotally, is that the tactics are very similar, but they are going to potentially look slightly different in polyamory. And I'll be running a much longer workshop on this on the 2nd, where I can like go into all of these areas. But to kind of like give it a taste, because obviously there's a lot of different ways that these tactics can display. I think the biggest change that we see when we're talking about abuse in polyamory is the indoctrination of other people to help the abuser. So this is something that like will happen in traditional understandings of monogamy. Like let's say you have a family dynamic, and there'll be an enrollment of the children or the other adults, peri-adults in the household, to kind of like scapegoat and target the victim, for want of a better word. And we see this in polyamory as well. So we're looking in polyamory, we're seeing things where it's like, I'm not sure I can like trust that the metamour is going to be like a separate person to this. Like they might get indoctrinated into the abuser's sort of like side of things, narrative of things, and we call those flying monkeys. And this is something that can even make it like even more difficult, because if you're trying to like check what's happened and you're trying to like get a good understanding of whether or not this is normal, these flying monkeys are going to be the ones that are going to tell you like, yeah, this is normal, like it's normal for them to like do X, Y, and Z. So this is like, I think one of the biggest things when it comes to the difference between abuse and polyamory and abuse and monogamy, is just like the number of the tactics kind of like grows slightly to accommodate all of the other relationships that could be in that polycule. Yeah, I think this is also something that can be expanded into a community understanding of abuse as well, which I quickly want to touch on because I think that that's really specific as well to polyamory, which is the use of smear campaigns and kind of what we call deny, reverse, attack, and victim roles. So basically what you do is it's called DARVO, DARVO. You come to somebody and go, hey, I think like you abusing me. And they'll go, I don't abuse you, and you're actually the one that's abusing me, and I'm going to use our community to have that narrative. And smear campaigns can be a very difficult thing to sift through. So say that this sort of use of other people is something that we see more often in polyamory than we do in monogamy. And a lot of the signs from monogamy can be tailored slightly to include polyamory as well. So there's many of them to go through. I'm trying to give like a taste.
Yeah, no, there is a lot. And I hear what you're saying though, where you can kind of use the sounding board almost of the community to be like, see, all of these other people think that I'm a good person, or all of these other people are telling you that what I'm doing is not bad, or all of these, look, even our other partners are, telling you that this is okay, or, something like that. Or just diminishing or denying the experience, right? And so there's all of those other voices. And when you have that sort of agreement, and right, like as humans, like we look for agreement. We're like, who else agrees with me? Like, and that's one test that we have for reality. And so if our test for reality is that people agree, well then, obviously I'm not being abused, or it's not as bad, or this is normal. If all of these other people, especially the people who, are inside of our polycule or whatever that is, are telling me this as well, because there's that trust factor too.
Exactly, which is why I said right at the top, it's so important to have a very wide network of support. I deal with people that don't necessarily like know or talk to each other, like have your work friends, have your yoga friends, have your family. Like you're allowed to keep these spaces separate, and they actually in places where you really need it, that's going to be the strength. The other tactics to kind of maybe just whiz through them at blistering speed is economic or financial abuse. So this is any any use of money or your job in order to control you. Again, with the design, intent, and consequence of making you unable to leave the situation. Using children, and this can include using the threat of pregnancy or demanding that you disclose things like your family planning and contraception choices. That could be included in that tactic. Emotional abuse is obviously very, very broad. There is denying, minimizing, and blaming, which is what we just spoke about. Intimidation, threats, and coercion. So this is getting you to do things maybe that are illegal or that you're not comfortable with, which, I mean, in polyamory, for example, would be like, well, you have to be my metamors because that's just how polyamory is done. You have to do that. Anyone that's trying to coerce you into something you don't want to do, that's kind of like a pink flag, as you said earlier. And obviously, we have physical and sexual violence, which I'm not going to get into because they're very, very triggering. There are a couple of others. I'm just going to think about them for a second.
You're good.
But like that's just one understanding of the way to understand the tactics that are there. And I think it's important to say, like, if you're not seeing this, but you're still like, some of these are ringing and some of these aren't. It's not like a checkbox, right? It's not like you have to go through this and like every single one of these need to apply to you. That's not going to be the thing that will decide whether or not you're really being abused, quote unquote. The thing that's going to do that is whether the tactics that you are noticing in your relationship are enough to present a pattern that makes you feel as if you don't have power and control in that relationship.
Yeah. And I think one of the number one questions, listen to me. One of the top questions that I get asked, when people recognize that they're in, they listen to this and they're like, oh, I think that might be me. Is, can this relationship be salvaged? Like, is there, if you recognize or think that you're in an abusive relationship, is there anything that you can do about that?
Yeah, you can leave. But it's not that easy, obviously, because and this is something that people always see to go, why didn't she just leave, or why didn't they just leave, or whatever. It's never that easy, right? But once you begin to think this could be abusive, it's time to start reaching out and making a safety plan. It's not the time to start digging in and fixing the relationship. I mean, I'm I'm obviously, this is my 2 cents on the matter. And if you are feeling this way, like, this is what I'm saying, like, you need to reach out to somebody in order to make this assessment for yourself. But what I would do, if I, what I did do was, you reach out to somebody, you make a safety plan. You can get that from, you can get templates of that online, but basically that is like a logistical strategy for getting yourself physically away from this person. And then slowly disentangling things like logistical and financial enmeshment, and obviously disentangling the emotional abuse as well, which will probably be like a much longer strategy will be needed for that, which might include professional care. The priority is your physical safety, because we see this time and time again that when abusers are confronted with their abuse, when they feel like they are losing control, this is actually when it's very, very dangerous. So oftentimes the safety plan will be made under sort of veil of secrecy, because for the safety of the person who's trying to leave. And the priority should always be that you are physically safe. Staying in a relationship and trying to salvage it and trying to work it out, that would never be something that I would suggest to my friend if they came to me and said, I think I'm in an abusive relationship. In fact, some people, some studies have shown that when an abusive couple goes to, and obviously that's very mononormative, but when an abusive couple goes to couple therapy, the abuser can start to use the therapy and the therapized language and weaponize that to actually like sustain the abuse. And again, you've just indoctrinated another flying monkey, because now you have a therapist that's going to be sitting there telling you, no, you're not being abused. So my personal advice to my friends to pass to me is, if you think you're in an abusive relationship, this is the time to begin to leave. And the future you can handle whether or not that's something you want to come back to. But that shouldn't be the question, I think. I don't think that should be the question on someone's mind. How can I salvage this? Because that's what the person isn't interested in, salvaging an equal relationship. The person is interested in controlling you, and that's not going to change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think that it's really important to also stress like the safety plan, and that it doesn't even have to be like in my own personal situation. My first step in the safety plan, it was to reach out, like you said, reach out to people and see who could hold a safe space for me. And I called, I think I called like 5 different people, and I just said, hey, if I needed to, could I call you at a moment's notice and come to your house? Right? Like that was step 1 of my safety plan. And so really illustrating like, yeah, like what do you need to do to be physically safe? What are the steps that you would need to take in order to do that?
Step 2 through 5 are usually things like I had to find my passport. I wasn't in the country. I need to find a passport. Get birth certificates, getting copies if you can't get the originals. And this could be like a series of, several days, or like an elongated amount of time when you have to like squirrel this stuff away, get some cash together. Like no one's going to sit there and judge you for not leaving really, really fast. It's just about making those steps to keep yourself physically safe. I think that's a great first step to make sure you can find a safe space.
Absolutely. So what about the people who are like, well, what if you just go back to monogamy? Wouldn't monogamy make everything better?
It was monogamy all along. To that, I would say, like, do you like the answer is not about the relationship that you're in. There's no relationship that's going to keep you safe from someone who wants to hurt you. There are people who will keep you safe. There are you will keep yourself safe. Monogamy is not a place where abuse doesn't happen. In fact, it happens at a very alarming and fatal rate. Many women are harassed, essayed, and unalived by their significant others. Like that's the person everyone goes to first when these things happen for a reason. Monogamy is not going to make the abuse go away. It's not. But it might, like it's the abuser that has to go away from your life, and then you have to heal. And whichever relationship you end up in after that, if it's coming from a place of healing, like that should be the goal, not to make it look as different as possible from the relationship you've just come out of.
Right. Yeah, because again, it's not about the relationship structure itself. It's about the person who is trying to harm you or control you, and it really is about their intentions and has nothing to do with really anything else.
Can you imagine if I was like, oh, I had a friend who was once like really abusive to me, so now I will never have friends? That would just be like ridiculous.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Clearly, friendship is bankrupt because one person was mean to me and abusive to me.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. And so we're gonna go on another break, and I want to continue to explore this conversation of mononormativity,
Yeah,
and
big word.
how, yeah, and how that impacts how we see the world, and how it impacts how we form relationships or how we don't form relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk about that when we come back from the break. And for those of you who are like, what the heck is mononormativity? Well, we're going to answer that question. So
Yes,
perfect.
we will.
All right, and we will be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cunningham, and today, how we are courageously expanding love on the show is to talk about abuse, and when abuse happens in relationships, what you can do about it, how you can be safe, and specifically when abuse happens in polyamorous relationships as well, and what you really need to look out for. And the topic that's come up is mononormativity. And I'm actually going to have our fabulous guest, Claire, explain what mononormativity is. So, Claire, what is mononormativity?
So glad you asked. So this is actually a term that I believe was coined by Eli Sheff. Dr. Eli Sheff is a researcher and writer about non-monogamy. And it basically is the normalization. If you think of heteronormative, it's using the same what's it called when you make a word? The word for that.
Same concept, same.
Yeah, the lexical working of it is the same. So mononormativity is the normalization of the way that we should be in a monogamous relationship. It's about how we should have our relationships, and not just how we should have them within those relationships, but how, as a structure of society, we privilege and value monogamous relationships above all others. So it's a lot wider than just like, well, you should be getting married and having kids, although that is part of it. It's also things like, well, your wife should be your most important person, and your husband should, if your husband doesn't want you hang out with your guy friends, you shouldn't hang out with your guy friends. And it's all of these other shows about the ways that we prioritize privilege and value monogamy and monogamous relationships above every other type of relationship in our social structure, in basically every social norm. And it's very linked to, in that regard, it's very linked to colonial understandings. So monogamy and marriage is a relatively recent concept in human history, and coincides with Abrahamic religion being spread, colonialization. There's a lot of great work being done by Dr. Kim Torba about how mononormativity, or the normalization of monogamy, was used to sort of like interfere and change the way that Indigenous communities were choosing to, like, the strategies they were using to manage their households and villages and communities generally. So it is a very large umbrella term that we can speak about in a lot of different ways. And it even presents in polyamory, which I think is always really interesting. So mononormativity doesn't just go away the moment you're doing non-monogamy. There's still like an assumption that, oh, if you're with someone for a very long time, then it's more serious. That's a concept you can borrow from mononormativity, and we can put into our hierarchical, or even sometimes non-hierarchical understandings of what polyamory is. Oh, if you don't use barriers, then it's more serious. It's all of these sort of like implicit ways that we think about our relationships and sort of prioritize, strategize, and privilege them in our society. And it's kind of as inescapable as any other oppressive norm creating regiment, if you like heteronormativity, cisgenderism, white supremacy, etc.
Yeah, so how does that, and I love the way that you put that too, is that sometimes we don't even think about like, it's so pervasive that you don't even think about how that impacts, if you are someone who is non-monogamous, if you're someone who's in a polyamorous relationship, or even in relationship anarchy, right, where it's just like we we've been raised in this, most of us have been raised in this, mononormative society where monogamy is the norm. And so even when we do, as you said, decide or, begin to have relationships outside of that, it's still really pervasive. So how do you see that show up or play out in relationships that aren't monogamous?
Yeah. I mean, the two examples I just gave, with it being like longer term or unmarried relationships, are sort of codified as therefore they must be romantic and serious. I think that's a really interesting one. There's actually literally no reason why the person you happen to be romantically related, like, into at that moment would be the right person to, for example, stop using barriers with. Like, in my head, that seems strange. Like, oh yeah, sure, this person I met, I'm like, a few months ago, and like, I'm imagining you've had all of the conversations you should have before you're discussing safer sex. But even then, it's like, but you wouldn't do that with a friend. Like, this is a friend I've known for years. Why wouldn't I have unprotected sex with my friend who I've known for years and I know everything that they do? Like, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And yet it is very normalized in polyamory that the primary relationship is the one that you don't use barriers with. There is an understanding that if you're with someone for a very long time, they have sort of like the de facto primary position, even if you're saying you don't practice hierarchy. We have also things like when people are shopping for thirds, there's a lot of couples privilege, which is obviously the way that I think mononormativity most shows up in an uninterrogated way. The amount of couples that I've seen that just say no couples privilege, and it's like, that's not really how privilege works. Like, the privilege is still going to be there. And it's going to come up in all these implicit ways, like having explicit vetoes are very obvious, but having implicit vetoes, like, well, I need to vet the partner before you start dating them. Why? Because this relationship is the really important one. Oh, because it's the longest running one. It's taking all of this, borrowing all of these concepts about how we prioritize, strategize, and privilege all of our relationships, including our friendships, including our like work life, everything, and kind of like carrying it into a non-monogamous space. Like, you can't get away from it, right? That's how a norm works, as you said. Yeah. It becomes so implicit. Like, it wouldn't work as a norm if we could be like, okay, let me step back from this. Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, it is hard to parcel out. And I know, for myself, there's so much nuance to it, and since it is so normalized, I've been practicing polyamory for 12 years now. And there's still times where I'm like, oh, well, that is, that is definitely a like mononormative way of thinking. Right. And, I think that, like the living with each other is an example of that. Like, yes, if you live with someone, then therefore that is the quote unquote more important relationship, or that's the relationship that takes precedent or priority. Like, and yeah, with couples privilege, where it's like, oh, well, you're a couple, and so you're like the central, point, yeah, in the polycule or whatever that may be, and like everything revolves around your relationship, your needs. We kind of try to skirt around that, right? And so really being able to and I think in what you said, being able to just start to see that, if people who are listening to this, if they're practicing non-monogamy, where you just start to recognize, like, and question, why do I feel that way? Why do I believe that? Why is that a thing that I feel is necessary in our relationship? And rather than justify it, just like ask the question and get curious about it. Why do I feel that way? Where does that come from? Right.
Yeah. And chances are that it's also become, so it's not just like, oh, because this person's the person I'm being with the longest. It's also like, the person I live with should be the person like that I am romantically in love with, or the person or the people that I'm romantically with, or like, oh, the person I have a child with should be the person that I love. So it's also, it's not just like, oh, what are it's like going both ways, right? It's not just saying, because I do this with this person, therefore they are this. It's also saying, because this person is X, therefore we should do this. So it's not just saying, oh, this person is this status because of what we do. It's also saying, because of this person's status, we should be doing these things. That's not always like the right choice, right? Like you can make your relationships completely from the ground up. You could be like, you know what, we run a great business together. I think we'd be great at raising a kid. Let's fucking do it.
Yeah.
Like there are literally no rules. Like no one is telling you can't do that. It's just it's an implicit understanding that would be crazy.
Yeah.
But like, why?
But why?
But why?
And that brings me to my next question. That's a beautiful segue into, this concept of relationship anarchy. And I came across this concept several years ago, and it's always been really appealing to me as well. So what is relationship anarchy for the people, Claire?
For the people. So anarchy can sound so scary and so political, but basically anything that is anarchist is refusing to be assimilated into a whole, right? That's it. It's not saying like it doesn't actually have any like particularly violent connotations, no matter like what you may think. So when you talk about relationship anarchy, it's just applying those principles into your intimate relationships. It's saying, well, all of those shoulds, all of those labels, we are actively and deliberately going to try and dismantle it, because we will not be assimilated into these things. I will not be pigeonholed into like a girlfriend or a wife or a friend. I'm going to allow these things to be built from the ground up. And when you begin to apply these into your intimate relationships, it's also very crucially, it's not about your romantic relationships. You cannot be a relationship anarchist and only apply that to like a sexual relationship or an intimate relationship. It's about all of your relationships. Like that's kind of a really big thing for me that I think is sometimes missed, is that like relationship anarchy is the philosophy of love. It's not necessarily about non-monogamy, right? You can have whatever identity you like. It's about making those questions, making them explicit, and then actively dismantling them. So when I came across this term, it immediately stuck with me. I think the short instructional manifesto is so small that you can read it in like 5 minutes. We could go through it right now. Like it's so small, by Andy Nordgren. So I definitely recommend like reading that if anyone's interested, to kind of think about the basic principles that Andy Nordgren has like laid out. And I think there's been a couple of books written about it since then, which have been very helpful as well, including Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator, which is about this application in intimate romantic relationships.
Okay. Well, so as we're getting into the meat of this topic, I'm going to actually, we're not going to go on break here because this is perfect. So we're going to just dive a little bit deeper instead of going on break today.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go.
Let's do it.
So this is, I think that for people who have never been introduced to the concept of relationship anarchy before, that it can be kind of mind-blowing, right? And so, and you just expanded it not just to romantic relationships or sexual relationships, but all relationships, right? And so what would that actually look like for all of your relationships? Like if you were to like really practice relationship anarchy, where like this is really appealing to me, I'm going to take this on, what are some of the things that you would need to start dismantling those other relationships? And so, because it is like a dismantling and then kind of building from the ground up, right?
It is, yeah. And part of it is the questions about mononormativity that we just mentioned. I think it's a great starting point. Why do I want these things? Do I even want these things? Am I being told this is what I want? But actually, I've never really questioned why I want it. Kids are a great example of that, or marriage, like these big milestones that we're told we should have. So I think starting from this point of what do you actually want is really critical to any relationship. But for relationship anarchy, I think some of the things that we have to unlearn are that relationships have to be one thing forever and they don't change. That the ideal relationship is one you build up to a point and then you maintain. This is very mononormative. This is very romance forward, right? But that's also not how people function, right? It's just like, it's not, I do not believe that that is how human beings are meant to relate to one another. There are friends, for example, that I don't see for years. And when we meet back up again, it feels like no time has passed, right? They don't stop being friends because I've gone out of my life for a really long time. They may escalate, if you like, to a more intimate friendship, and then de-escalate as I change, as I grow as a person. So sometimes I refer to this as a dynamism. Unlearning that things have to be static and you have to have like a rigid label around it. It's going to take some time, because it's what we've been, I mean, it's also safety and comfort, right? Like, you know what this person is and you know what's on the table and what's not. It's kind of like weird if you then start being like, oh, maybe like tomorrow I'm going to find them super sexy and we'll just like have a quick fuck and then we'll go out and go to our business meeting. Like, that sounds crazy. So starting from an idea of like, I change as a person. So why would my relationships not change with me? Instead of me trying to stay the same so I can be the same thing for everyone all the time, we can begin to kind of curate relationships that are able to ebb and flow with us, where I'm able to step back and then step forward. I'm able to move into different roles. There's this sort of energy shifting that's allowed. And then you can come in with like the tools of how to actually have those conversations, right? Once you've unlearned this, then it's about like building up skills to actually have those discussions and actually be able to like have those relationships work in that way.
Yeah, so what about the argument that it's like, well, if you had I think marriage is like probably the primary example, right? Is like, well, what if you found someone that you married and, you know that it's a healthy relationship if you grow together. Like that's something that I hear in like monogamous relationships where it's like, well, we're just going to grow together. What would you say about that kind of argument against like
Oh no, I think that's a great argument for it. That's exactly what I'm saying.
yeah.
But what's wild is that then you go, yeah, you should totally do that. So should your friends. You should grow together with your friends. You should grow together with your community. You should grow together with yourself. And what happens then is if you grow in a different way, oh, you're going to cut off this way of growing because that's not the way that that person's growing. Is that what you're going to do? And most people are like, well, no, I wouldn't want my loved one to do that. Even the most like traditional monogamous married person would be like, well, no, I don't want my person to like not do like grow and like become a better person just because I'm not doing that at that time. There's plenty of reasons why I might take a step back from a relationship, even in a marriage, even in a monogamous relationship. My friendships, sometimes it's like, okay, I actually like don't have enough spoons to be responding to these people, so I'm going to step back. Happens to me very frequently when I'm in a new relationship, right? But the commitment that this person will still be there at the other end, that is what people like out of marriage, right? It's like, I know that if I am on my worst day or like a couple of years and I'm focusing on my career and then I have someone to do that with. I think that's a great example of the kind of like commitments that you could have that is dynamic, but we are for some reason only applying it to one person.
Right.
And we are limiting it to them growing in a linear fashion. Like that's I would say not an argument against. That's a perfect case of like, you could do this with everyone in your life, right? You could be growing closer and together with a whole community of people. And it seems very, very clear to me from having conversations with people who do come from it like that, that those people are also very happy to be like, you know what, maybe this person becomes my best friend. Maybe the sex doesn't continue to be fantastic after the first 6 years, after the first kid or whatever. Like, so I think actually it's not as like radical if you were to couch it in that way, right? Because that's kind of like people expect that, but they're just applying it to just one person for some reason.
I think that that's a brilliant answer because I think a lot of people believe that non-monogamy is against monogamy, right? Where it directly flies in the face of, where it is an affront to, where it is in direct attack. And so I think to put it in a context of that, these concepts that we have in non-monogamy and relationship anarchy, that they they're not, that's not it, right? That you can take some of these concepts and blend them together. Does that make sense? Right?
It does make sense. I just want to like reiterate though that, as I said at the top, relationship anarchy is not about non-monogamy. Relationship anarchy doesn't care about your monogamy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. Like, you know, if you happen to be going through a period of your life where you want to be with one person, then like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, relationship anarchy is, I think that it's an easier way to come at it, is to be like, this is actually, I think it's compatible with non-monogamy if you are non-monogamous, but I think it's also compatible with monogamy if you are monogamous. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so, no, that makes total sense.
Yeah, like a good example of this is like, we seem to really stigmatize this, but like serial monogamists, where people who are like in a monogamous relationship and in a monogamous relationship and in a monogamous relationship, it's like, well, this is actually a good example of like one of these contested waters in the polyamorous community about whether serial monogamists are truly monogamous or not. And I always find this to be a really fascinating case study for relationship anarchists, because I'm just like, it doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. Right. It can be compatible with relationship anarchy and not look like everyone else. Like, that's the point. So I think it's just like really important to note that, like, when I'm talking about relationship anarchy, I'm not talking about non-monogamy, because there are people that are naturally monogamous people. And I want them to know that like relationship anarchy has something to offer that as well, especially now we're living to like 100. Like, you really want to have the same relationship you've had like, you get to 30 and you're like, that's it, 70 more years of just this. Like, no, come on. You want to have a little bit of anarchy in there. You want to have that dynamism. And whether that becomes a non-monogamous agreement, or that relationship and you transition into a non-monogamous space, it doesn't matter to a relationship anarchist, I don't think. But that's just my take.
Yeah.
That's just me.
No, and I do, and I think that that's really beautiful, because, you know, there really is, kind of going back to what I was saying, and I don't want to, you know, like reiterate a point too much, but it's like, I think that people feel like there's a direct like contrast, or that, you know, if we're saying this one thing, that means we're attacking this other thing, when actually no, it's not, you know. And I love the way that you just laid out what relationship anarchy is, as this beautiful way to operate really however you want to. And it's just like, it's not attacking anything. It's just saying, what do you want? Great. Go do that.
I think what we're learning, Elizabeth, is that I just have an issue with being told what to do. And so immediately was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it whatever I want.
I think you and I are very similar.
That's really it.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for, you know, sharing about, you know, I think all of these topics are so important, whether we're talking about abuse or whether we're talking about mononormativity, privilege, relationship anarchy, and really being able to create, you know, whatever you want. You know, it's really a beautiful way to have people look at the different dynamics in which relationships show up, and be aware of that. It's not just this one thing, you know, and that's okay. It's okay that it's not just one thing, right? So I want to promote you. I want to promote what's going on with you, because you're doing so many good things. So would you like to tell us about Polyamory Day?
I would love to. So this is a digital showcase, so it's entirely online. It's happening this Saturday all day. If you can't make it on Saturday, I encourage you to get a day pass anyway, because obviously it's recorded content. You can also add on last year's archived footage as well. We have an amazing keynote, which is answering the question, is monogamy natural? From an evolutionary psychologist point of view. We have workshops on abuse and polyamory, which I am running, which kind of like leads on from this, and also about fostering and adoption in the UK. We have skills sessions on jealousy and on couples privilege, which we also mentioned today. And we have panels on disability and polyamory and kink and polyamory. So we have some amazing content we've lined up. Even though it is a showcase of the UK and Ireland, that is to showcase the speakers and the prescient topics of the UK and Ireland. It is open to anybody, and tickets are on a sliding scale from 15 to 25 Great British Pounds, you can go to www.polyamoryday.co.uk. And I'm very excited. This is our second one. So I'm like really enjoying it. It's really fun.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm super stoked on it.
Yeah.
And you have a giveaway for us today.
I do. I'm happy to give away 1 full day pass of that polyamory day, but I have 2 things to give away. I'm also giving away a membership to our book club for the next 3 months, starting the 1st of April. We are running for 3 months and we are doing the polyamory breakup book. So Polypages runs the Polypages book club with the support of Thorntree Press. And we are doing Catherine Labriola's amazing book, the polyamory breakup book. It's honestly like very, very excellently written. So I'm so excited to get into it. We're going to have Kathy come and speak to us. We always do supported reading throughout the 3 months. And we are going to be using a curriculum that I co-wrote with, we're basing it on a curriculum that I co-wrote with the Growth Arc to talk about decoupling, de-escalation, how to do that in ways that are constructive and not hurtful. And I think it's helpful for basically anyone. Like, I don't think it's just about polyamory, as we've been saying. So I'm happy to be giving away that membership as well.
Oh, beautiful. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize you're giving away 2 things. That's brilliant. All right. So yeah, so day pass to Polyamory Day, and also give away to the membership of the Polypages book club. Please call in. Jacob, there's a number on the screen. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, there's been the number on the screen. I can't see it. So I'm always
we
like,
can't
it's
see
here,
it.
Right?
I can just see Elizabeth and it's great.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. It's perfect. All right, so please call in, take advantage of that amazing offer. Thank you so much, Claire, for offering that up. It's a brilliant opportunity, so please take advantage. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Claire, so much for coming on and sharing all of your expertise. So appreciate you. Everyone who is listening now or watching now, we run live shows every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in the US. You can also catch us afterwards, after it's aired. We're on YouTube and on really any podcast platform out there. So just look up The Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding in Love. And until the next time that we meet, keep loving. You have been listening to The Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham. Tune in live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on transformationtalkradio.com, where we shed light on relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. Learn to love yourself and create the relationships you want. Connect with me at ElizabethAnnCunningham.com. That's ElizabethAnnCunningham.com.